We're going to move on now for our next session, which is autonomous public transit vehicles. I will turn things over to my partner, Michael Leggett, momentarily to introduce our speakers. But before I do that, a little bit about Michael. Michael is a co-founder of the Dentons Canada Smart Cities think tank. He centers his practice on corporate and commercial law, corporate governance, mergers and acquisitions, public-private partnerships, smart cities, and the transportation industry specifically. His transportation industry practice serves primarily the bus, port, rail, transit, and truck sectors of the industry. His practice also embraces the emerging world of autonomous vehicles. His transportation practice also serves governments and their agencies, as well as private sector participants in the industry. He is a frequent speaker on panels discussing opportunities surrounding smart vehicle deployment and transit electrification, and the importance of communicating the need to be inclusive in communities of all sizes. Michael is former honorary counsel to the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium, CUTRIC. CUTRIC's objective is to make Canada a leader in the transit-related research, development, and innovation through industry academic collaborations. I now turn the screen and the mic over to Michael to introduce our esteemed speakers and move forward with the session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kat, and welcome everyone. So we have a stellar panel of speakers this afternoon. Ben Case and Dave Aslam and Sierra Buehler, all from Toronto Transit Commission. And I will run through their bios for you. Ben has over 20 years at the TTC. He's held roles that span across the organization, including subway track and structure maintenance, rail vehicle engineering, safety and environment, enterprise risk management, intergovernmental relations, project portfolio management, and most recently in transit vehicle program delivery. He's currently head of TTC's vehicle programs department, which is comprised of a dedicated team of project management, engineering, quality assurance, and warranty management staff and consultants. He's accountable for the stewardship of a 15-year portfolio of vehicle procurements, overhauls, and life extension programs totaling $7+ billion. The vehicle programs department portfolio includes fleet planning, buses, streetcars, subway, Wheel-Trans, and non-revenue vehicles. Ben really has nothing to do. He's hardly busy at all. Sierra Buehler is the acting senior planner in the strategy and foresight department of TTC. She's responsible for developing standards and policies to govern the provision of TTC services. Since joining the TTC in 2017, she's worked at TTC's 5-year service plan and 10-year outlook, implementation on priority bus lanes, service standards, microtransit, service integration, and automated vehicles. Prior to joining TTC, she worked for 3 years as a transportation planning consultant. And Dave has over 25 years of project management experience with over 20 years in the transit industry. He's been involved in many projects across all facets of the transit, from safety critical systems such as vehicle location communication systems to new vehicle procurement such as zero emission electric buses. He's currently acting manager, new technology and innovation. In this role, Dave enjoys the opportunity of evaluating emerging vehicle technologies with a focus on enhancing safety and operational efficiencies. Some of the key projects and initiatives include driver safety assistance systems, hybrid bus EV mode go fencing, advanced turning warning systems, hydrogen injection, bus platooning, and connected autonomous vehicles. So as everyone knows, our session now deals with autonomous public transit vehicles, and that's part of the bigger emerging world of autonomous vehicles. And Obviously, the move towards digitalization in smart cities certainly does and needs to embrace the movement of goods and people. And so autonomous public transit vehicles, in a sense, represents the leading edge of that in municipalities across the world, including in Toronto, and TTCs at the pointy end of that. So our program is going to involve a presentation by our TTC friends, and then we'll ask them some tough questions.
Hi, Michael, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. So the presentation kind of follows two streams. There's the TTC's overall AV strategy and plan, and then we're going to talk about, and of course within that is the automated shuttle trial, but we'll get into the shuttle trial with some detail. I'll go over the strategy and plan, and Sarah and Dave will talk about the role of the shuttle and some of the technical aspects of the shuttle as well. And that should give everyone a pretty good idea of what we're into here. So of course, to start with, an autonomous vehicle is capable of sensing its environment and navigating within that environment with one degree or another of human intervention. And there are 5 levels of automation. There's level 0 means no automation. There's driver assistance, which is stuff like blind spot monitoring and this type of thing. There's partial automation, which is when the vehicle itself has the ability to take over control of the vehicle for braking, accelerating, and steering. Think of this as kind of autopilot on a Tesla. There's also full self-driving, which maybe is somewhere between level 2 and level 3. And then when you get up to level 4, that's when you really don't need to have your full attention. A person behind the wheel doesn't need to have their full attention to monitor what the vehicle is doing. And then finally, with 5, you don't actually have to have a person there at all. In fact, you don't need to have a steering wheel. You don't need to have the ability even to intervene manually. And so really, depending on what mode of transportation you're talking about within the transit industry, the maturity of these technologies are at different points. You have subway trains, which have for many years been able to operate autonomously with full driverless operation. In fact, there are many transit agencies around the world have no operator on board at all. For TTC, we have our Line 1 ATC, or Automatic Train Control Program, which there is an operator on board, but they're really there for vigilance. And otherwise, when fully implemented, the train does all the movements itself. It maintains headways or the distance between trains. It makes sure there's always a correct stopping position, or the vehicle stops in the right position at the platform. It opens the doors, closes the doors. It does everything needed to operate that service. And the benefit of that is largely to do with the distance that you need to maintain between vehicles. So in level 4, level 5 automation, you can have vehicles that operate much closer to one another than they could do if they were being operated manually. And that means that you can increase the capacity of the service you deliver without significant upgrades otherwise to infrastructure, like widening roads or putting in redundant subway lines and such. And so it is significant advantage when it comes to increasing capacity within our network. For buses, Wheel-Trans buses, our non-revenue fleet, we don't have the technology is not mature enough yet. We have some limited deployments of levels 2, 3, and 4 on buses in dedicated, physically separated rights of way. But for mixed traffic, which are bus network is largely mixed traffic or is entirely mixed traffic, really. We don't have, the technology is not mature yet enough to deploy on the buses, but it's coming. And so what we're looking to do is to adopt these lower levels of automation across those modes that where the technology is less mature, to take advantage of the safety benefits there, and also to provision for higher levels of automation as the technology matures. If you go to the next slide, please, Sarah. It is up, by the way. That's great, thank you. So for our, so I guess in terms of the benefits of, I'll just elaborate a little bit here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Through all levels of automation, we can stand to expect increased safety because you've got either simply you're advising the operator that there's something that may be unsafe and allowing them to act more quickly, or to see something that would otherwise have gone unseen. Or of course, as the vehicle takes more and more control over the operation, the vehicle is capable of, and this isn't just in theory, this is in practice now, of course, is capable of stopping the vehicle, so detecting an unsafe condition, responding to that unsafe condition faster than a human could. For levels 2 and 5, we see increases in ride comfort. So now we can manage the speed or the acceleration rate of vehicles and the deceleration rates to improve ride comfort. That smooth acceleration deceleration also results in quite significant savings in fuel costs and lowers GHG emissions. Long-term potential benefits, particularly as you get to higher levels of automation, is addressing the first mile, last mile problem. And of course, this gets to the West Rouge trial. Ultimately, when that technology is mature enough, you may have an opportunity to deploy vehicles that connect people and communities who are otherwise not directly connected to the transit system to major arteries in the bus network or subway network. And then other innovative and efficient service delivery models and efficient fleet utilization. And what's meant there is that you could at some point, you can envision now that at some point we'll be able to have what I would describe as a vehicle that is dynamic, in that you could have 2, 3 buses, for example, running in tandem, and they provide the capacity of a rail vehicle when coupled virtually together. And they run on a streetcar network, or a network that would traditionally be served by streetcars, or even something closer to an SRT vehicle like what we have in Scarborough, and provide that level of capacity, that higher order of transit. But then when you're off peak, when the ridership is off peak, or for areas of the city where the ridership demand doesn't require it, those vehicles can separate from that consist and provide a service that's scaled to the need. And that dynamic ability to flexibly change the size of the vehicle that's being deployed could quite dramatically transform the way service is delivered in transit going forward. Next slide, please. Today, though, the AV strategy is really centered around improving safety. And as I mentioned, because we don't have the level of maturity required to achieve that kind of vision I just described, we can continue to deploy automatic train control on subways, which we are doing. And we're completing off our line 1. Next will be line 2. We'll continue to evaluate, test, and implement safety enhancements on streetcars, buses, Wheel-Trans vehicles, and non-revenue vehicles. I mentioned non-revenue here because some people don't realize that in addition to the modes of transit that we're all familiar with, we have over 1,000 non-revenue vehicles of different types that support our operations. Explore the role of AV in microtransit. I mentioned again that the West Rouge trial will help us to do that. And then improve our understanding, of course, of AV technology and how it can eventually be morphed into that ultimate vision that I described. Next, please. And this next slide is really not anything new other than what I've just described to you up to this point, but development AV strategy. This slide was first developed put together in 2019. And so since then, within this 1 to 3 year period, as of that date, the micro shuttle trial is just about to be launched. In fact, as you know, and you'll hear more about shortly. We'll continue with the automation of the subway system, and as mentioned, look across all the other modes to see how and when we can implement autonomous driving technology to improve safety in the next several years. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sierra, who's going to kick off a focus discussion on the West Rouge automated shuttle trial.
Awesome. Thank you, Bam. Can everyone see and hear me?
I can.
Okay, excellent. Just having a little bit of technical difficulties over here. Apologies. Okay, so in addition to Bam's presentation on the strategy and plan, Dave Haslam and I will present on the West Rouge automated shuttle trial, which is expected to launch for passenger service in November. So today we'll just go over the project objectives, the concept, the service plan, vehicle information, including the interior and accessibility features, the safety and testing of the vehicle, stop locations, infrastructure changes, vehicle and stop branding and comms plan. A few of those we will breeze through, so it's a bit faster. So this trial is led by the City of Toronto in partnership with TTC and Metrolinx. And the purpose of this trial is to increase our understanding and knowledge of the technical requirements to operate an automated shuttle, the administrative requirements to deliver service through an automated shuttle, the interaction of an automated shuttle in the transit and transportation system, the human response to an automated shuttle, and the value an automated shuttle service can provide in the transit and transportation system. It's about all three partners building capacity and learning about this technology and these types of vehicles. The project will also help achieve other autonomous vehicle objectives like increase public support for the use of innovation in the public transit system, develop and increase the attractiveness of Toronto for investment in the development and export of automated transit vehicle technology, and provide leadership in the automated vehicle preparedness at the municipal level through knowledge transfer and exchange. So as I said earlier, we're planning to launch passenger service on this trial in the next few weeks. Passenger service is designed to provide free service to the Rouge Hill GO station, from the Rouge Hill GO station to the West Rouge neighborhood and the nearby National Urban Park. The vehicle will operate weekdays during peak periods and on selected weekends for 4 hours, and schedules are aligned with the GO trains. The vehicle will operate on a fixed route with fixed stop locations, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a bit. Auto Guardian by SmartCone, an Ontario-based company, will be the operator of this vehicle, providing onboard safety attendance, basic vehicle maintenance, and operational oversight. And due to public health advice around COVID-19, passengers will be required to book a ride. The West Rouge neighborhood was chosen for this trial because it fits many of the criteria the three organizations were looking for, including the route that is outside the existing TTC 400-meter service area, which is shown here in yellow, this part right here. And as you can see in the gray area, there's a gap in our coverage in this specific neighborhood. It is also within close proximity to a major transit hub, the GO station, which is a transit hub at the edge of our city where passengers can connect to interregional train service and TTC bus service. The GO station also had pre-COVID parking capacity issues, There are no large hills or rail crossings. There are pickup and drop-off areas available at the GO station. The total route distance is less than 5 kilometers, and the area has low traffic volumes as the National Urban Park cuts off street access to the neighboring municipality. And then finally, there are no school zones along the route. So that's why it was chosen in that area. A few details on the service. It'll be scheduled every 30 minutes with weekday service operating from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and from 3:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Weekend service will operate on selected weekends from the community center and back to the Rouge Hill GO station from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. and from 3:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. And the midday gap will be used to recharge the vehicle. The service will be free for customers, but they'll be required to book a trip in advance, and all stops are accessible along with the vehicle. Oops, I think I went a little too far. Okay. Pass it on to Dave.
Just unmuting here. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. Meet Ollie. This is Ollie on the right, and you have seen a couple pictures of Ollie on the slides prior. It's the vehicle that was chosen through a competitive procurement by our project partners. And I don't know if we specified the project partners on the following slide, but it's the City of Toronto, Metrolinx, and the TTC are working in partnership and all bringing different skill sets to this trial project. So Ollie operates at 20 kilometers an hour in autonomous mode and 40 kilometers an hour in manual mode. It's fully accessible and it's self-driving on a predefined route, but it has an operator on board that can take control when needed. It's fully electric, zero emissions, is guided by LiDAR and radar, and it has cameras on the interior and exterior, but those cameras are blurred for privacy, and they're not used for any of the self-driving functions that you're starting to see pop up in Tesla and so forth. And just one other point I wanted to add on the LA is it's predominantly 3D printed. So everything from its shell to portions of the floor and the wheel areas, fenders, so forth are all 3D printed. Next slide, please, Sarah. So the shuttle uses a fusion of LiDAR and radar and GPS to localize its position and identify objects nearby. Obstacle avoidance algorithms are used to prevent collisions with both static and dynamic objects, and it can reroute the shuttle if path becomes obstructed. And the autonomous drive system, or ADS, identifies objects and obstacles, movements, and size while predicting future movement of those objects. So it can identify inclusions, the speed they're running, and where the intersect would be. Proprietary safety and slows to avoid potential collisions and adjust to create a new safe trajectory around the obstacle when permitted to do so on its predefined mapped route. If the shuttle experiences a fault or issue that prevents it from continuing to safely operate on a route, or environmental conditions change in a way that would affect the safety driving, for example, ice or excessive snow, which we're sure we're going to encounter from when we're running our trial, Ollie can perform a safe stop without the operator intervening. And lastly, the shuttle is also equipped with redundant GPS units, wheel encoders, and onboard inertial measurement unit to validate GPS positional data. So basically, a modern day dead reckoning it can do. So it also helps in areas that might have tall buildings where it would have gaps and where it talks back to its home base. Next slide, please. As I stated before, it operates on its predetermined mapped routes. The shuttle is placed outside the route. The autonomous mode does not engage and will have to run in manual mode. This is how we move it, deadhead it to its route daily, is on manual mode. Within the route, the shuttle has the ability to stop for initiating an emergency stop. It adheres to a top speed that we've limited it to, which was the 20 kilometers an hour. And the shuttle will stop at each of the defined passenger stops on its own. So a passenger doesn't have to wave it down. The operator doesn't have to pull it over and dock at the stop. It will do this on its own. The shuttle sensors are capable of detecting various objects, vehicles, pedestrians, small animals, large tree branches. And we'll see how it is in the wintertime with snow drifts and things like that. And we found out yesterday that other obstructions also includes garbage bins, which was interesting because it was garbage day as we were testing yesterday. Next slide, please, Sarah. And a little bit about the interior. Sierra touched on this before, but during the trial project, we'll be using a trip booking system to pre-book the trips. And these are COVID precautions that, depending on how things go through the trial, may be lifted, depending on what the new precautions are. Also during the trial, we'll run a maximum of 5 seated passengers, or 1 passenger in a mobility device and 1 seated. And one thing to note is the seatbelts must be worn by the passengers at all times when the vehicle is in motion. Next slide.
Okay, I'll come back to the accessibility features. So the Ollie 2.0 is designed to accommodate customers with disabilities. The vehicle is equipped with 1 onboard mobility device securement and a manual ramp that will be deployed by the safety attendant. Due to the size of the vehicle, only 1 mobility device can be accommodated at a time, and similar to seatbelts, the mobility device securement is mandatory. There are visual and audio pre-boarding and stop announcements. There are interior and exterior screens and speakers, and there will always be a safety attendant on board who can take over operation if needed. These safety attendants are also trained to accommodate passengers with disabilities, and service animals will be allowed on board, and then we will also identify priority person seating.
The safety and testing. This was a huge component of this trial project, as a lot of these technologies were new to us. So we engaged an independent safety engineer that had experience in automated technologies. The engineer conducted a peer review of all the vehicle test cases, results existing and new, quality control at the Knoxville plant, safety procedures, and onboard systems and operational procedures. So this was invaluable to us, as this was a great learning exercise, and is definitely part of our best practices at the end of this project. We also performed a review of the shuttle route to identify any irregularities or inclusions that may affect the safe operation of the shuttle. And you'll see some slides following that show some changes that we had made to the actual route infrastructure. And a cybersecurity assessment, on-site first responders training, and a detailed hazard log with mitigations was produced, and I'll speak to more on that in the following slides. And also operation procedure walkthroughs were performed with the operator. And the pictures on the right are some of the additional tests that we required from the vendor that they performed actually at their area in Knoxville, just for extra validation for ourselves. Next slide, please. So the project, we followed MTO guidelines, ISO standards for autonomous vehicles for our testing and validation. We also leveraged, and I don't mention it on this slide here, the Transport Canada guidelines for autonomous and prototype vehicles. So using these 3 guidelines, we really built our methodology on how we were going to look at and test this vehicle, and what we would look for in the operational procedures, that things that may differ from the operation procedures that we have for our operators and our vehicles today. So the standard that we used is the ISO 22737 standard for autonomous vehicle, and it specifies requirements for the operational design domain, minimum performance requirements, performance test procedures, and pass-fail criteria. one thing to note, following these guidelines, we did have the vehicle vendor perform additional on-road tests at their facility to satisfy some of the ISO testing guidelines. And to add that the standard is fairly new. It was June this year. So some of this was new to the vendor, the vehicle vendor themselves. So this was beneficial for all the parties, including the vendor. Next slide, please, Sierra. We produced a very detailed hazard log and risk assessment. We wanted to ensure customer safety, obviously, and bystanders within in the neighborhood itself. We identified hazards and risks in the existing shuttle operation procedure and plan. And we did that by really looking at these new standards and seeing through other projects around the globe that have run these things. We reduced risk by identifying new procedure or updated procedures where needed. We proposed additional safety validation tests to be conducted by the vendor and assess change in risk which may result from change in the operating strategy. Really to ultimately just provide a safe trial service.
So when determining the stop locations for the shuttle trial, staff examined appropriate spacing for transit service, safety, accessible waiting area, user need, and community input. The shuttle will stop at every designated stop. As Dave mentioned, due to the autonomous driving system, passengers do not need to inform the attendant in advance that they wish to disembark. There are two images on the screen. The top image shows a before picture at our community center with the pole and the pad drawn on the picture, and this is how we initially planned all the stops. Then we went out to check everything before installing the asphalt pads and the poles. And then the second image just shows a completed stop. In addition to the stop improvements, there are also infrastructure changes. Signs were installed advising road users that this road is in use by a slow-moving automated shuttle and that it stops frequently. There's a solid center line that was repainted to a striped center line to allow cars and buses to legally pass. And bike lanes were already installed along the corridor. The last infrastructure change was focused on the intersection at the entrance of the Rouge National Urban Park. Crosswalks were installed and sidewalk asphalt was redone to improve accessibility, and then also the curb radii was changed to improve safety.
And I'll go through these last couple slides very quickly so we can have some questions, because I know we're short on time, and we did have a short video of it in motion that everybody might want to see. I want to go to the next slide, Sarah. Just our branding, and actually the next slide. The branding of the vehicle and of the stops and signage, we followed what we're doing currently with our hybrid and electric buses. So it's a very similar design. And then the color scheme that we chose doesn't mimic any of the services that are predominant now in the area, being Go or TTC. So it was a totally different color palette. And honestly, it matched the neighborhood very well, seeing as it was by the lake. So that's what I'll put on that. So I want to give us some extra time. If you want to go to the next slide. Go ahead, Sarah.
Then the last slide is that there are many different ways that we are communicating this to customers in the neighborhood, including social media, our website, and announcements on buses and in-station subway stations. And if you would like more information, please visit toronto.ca/AV shuttle or email us directly. Okay, can go to question answer, and I will put up the video while we're doing that.
So Michael, any questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
I have about 2 hours of questions, which we have 5 minutes, and that will work well. Just a couple of cheeky questions about safety and risks and mitigation of risks. The slides refer to a number of known obstacles. So there's going to be a number from the vehicle software point of view of unknown obstacles, obstacles that are ubiquitous, but for one reason or another, the software just doesn't recognize them. There'll be known hazards, fog, rain, and snow. Is the only response to those kinds of hazards to slow the vehicle, bring it to the side of the road and stop it? Or is there something built into the software where the vehicle or the software makes choices? And it's sort of the classic autonomous vehicle question, is that if there's an unavoidable collision about to happen, and the vehicle has choices as to where it's going to, what it's going to collide with. How have you dealt with that issue? Is there just no choices within the software, or does the software make choices? The classic, of course, is that there's an elderly person, or there's toting a cane, and then there's another person with a baby carriage, and which do you collide with? So, as I say, cheeky.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer that one, Ben?
Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
This vehicle with its autonomous feature set isn't at that level where it's going to make its own choices, and it's back to the school bus full of children, or a car with another person, and it decides which one that it would actually have a collision with. This will actually just stop, or the operator on board will have to take over operation of the vehicle and move around whatever obstacle is there. It can move around obstacles, being a garbage can, a pile of leaves, something like that in the street, but it's not going to make a choice of or make any sort of way on its own on which side it'll go to. So it's not at that level yet.
Yeah.
Not this
well, you
one.
answered one of my other questions, is that to what extent can the attendant, I won't call them operator or driver, take over operation? And the answer is the attendant's in a position to take over operation and deal with unknown circumstances. So that's
immediately too, by the way,
yeah.
and many ways for the vehicle to stop. It can stop itself, and there is also emergency stops on board.
Right. So my second and last cheeky question is around technology. I've heard it said amongst some that we're trading one risk for another. We're trading the risk of driver error for technology glitch, and there's as much risk in one as there is in the other. How do you respond to that kind of concern?
Well, the first part of that statement is true. We are trading one risk for another, or I guess it's the same risk, but the causes are you're trading, but
Right.
the risk is not the same. You look at the risk is made up of two components, as everybody knows. You've got the impact, and at least two, depending on your model, but impact and frequency, or impact and probability, severity and probability, however you want to look at it. And the severity of a collision between a vehicle of this size, or larger, obviously, for higher orders of transit, and a person is potentially catastrophic. You have to assume that it's catastrophic, and that means it's it equates to fatality or to multiple fatalities even. The probability of collision is proven to be lower with autonomous vehicle technology than human error. And of course, when I say proven, I mean in those applications where we can, where I mentioned at the top, that there's a different degree of maturity depending on which mode you're talking about. And so for train operation, it's proven. There's no question about it that in terms of kilometers operated, and collisions that have occurred either between between trains or between train and people at track level or what have you. That happens far less frequently than under manual operation. And so the key is to allow the technologies, and through trials like this, to demonstrate that the technologies are maturing for other modes to get to that level of confidence. But you are trading one risk for another in a way. But and everyone, people talk about the fact that Tesla, people get into accidents in a Tesla vehicle, and it's big news. Well, if we had big news every time somebody crashed into something, like on a vehicle that was manually operated, we'd be doing nothing else but watching people crash into people.
That's right. So final question, and really it's one for you, Bem, again. It deals with what the future holds. I know that in some jurisdictions, Scotland, elsewhere, they're testing full-size buses, autonomous buses, and so we're obviously moving in that. As you, TTC, look out in the future, do you see the role for autonomous vehicle as being just last mile, or do you see it regular route? Do you see, right now you're in the process of a huge, very expensive a change from diesel to zero emission buses. Will those be retrofittable, if that's a word, into autonomous vehicles as we look out over 5, 10 years?
So no, it's definitely not going to be limited to the first mile, last mile challenge, if you will. We are looking at first and foremost to deploy driver safety assist technology, which is still autonomous vehicle technology, except it doesn't take over control of the vehicle. But we're looking to that technology to enhance safety up to for as long as it takes to get confidence in the maturity of the technology before the vehicle itself can do the driving. But in the short term, I say short term, relatively short term, I would say in the next 5 years, we're going to be looking to trial platooning of buses at least. And so this means having an operator in the first bus and having either no operator in the bus that travels behind it. Right. And this is it travels a certain distance behind it just to maintain a safe braking distance. And so you can imagine that distance changing depending on how fast this consist is going, but ultimately going really close up to the one behind it. And this is, again, this is the vision of having, even though it's not a fully autonomous system I'm describing, because there's an operator in the first vehicle, it is on the path to transitioning towards that vision I mentioned, where you can have maybe 2 buses or 3 buses in place of a streetcar. And of course, you don't have to have overhead, you don't have to have the track, you don't have to have all these investments in infrastructure to provide the service of a higher order of magnitude or order of transit. And to answer your question, so yes, we're going to market towards the end of this year for 300 battery electric buses, and they will all, and we're asking for options for either provision or even for supply of autonomous vehicle technology, depending on where the market is at that point. So at the very least, I would say that we would have a provision for future retrofit of those buses for AV technology. But ideally, we will be seeing the technology mature enough that we can exercise options for maybe, the first 5 of our buses would have some ability to do that platooning I just described.
Right. Bem, Sierra, Dave, thank you very much. That was very informative, and our appreciation for you participating in the program.
Yes,
thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bem, Dave, Sierra, and Michael, thank you. And I know, Michael, you'll be back with us shortly to talk about expanding high-speed internet across Canada. But our next topic is on the question of whether Canada is leading or lagging in the race to 5G. For this topic, my partner, Monica Song, will be moderating a discussion with Viet, who she will introduce shortly. Monica has close to 20 years of experience as a litigator and as an administrative and regulatory lawyer. She has appeared before various levels of courts and statutory boards and tribunals, including before the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, and the Ontario Energy Board, as well as the Canadian Human Rights Commission and the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, among others. Monica is the leading Canadian lawyer in telecommunications and broadcasting, providing strategic advice to wireline and wireless carriers, resellers, satellite providers, cable companies, internet service providers, digital media undertakings, and equipment manufacturers in relation to all manner of regulatory, licensing, and public policy issues affecting the industry. The depth and breadth of her experience also encompasses advising clients on constitutional law, conflicts of law, private and public procurement matters, food and drug, transportation law, access to information, as well as privacy law matters. Welcome, Monica, and I'll turn the screen and the mic over to you to introduce your co-panelist and to get the session started. Thank you both for joining.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for that very kind introduction. I am delighted to join you all this afternoon with Mr. Viet Nguyen. Just give me a moment and I will start sharing my screen. Great. Okay, so I hope that everything is good on your end, the audience's end. Your panel today is comprised of myself, but the main star of the show is Mr. Viet Nguyen, Head of Government and Industry Relations at Ericsson Canada. In his over 30-year career at Ericsson, he's fulfilled a number of different roles. And he's currently Head of Government and Industry Relations, responsible for Ericsson Canada's interaction with government and associations on technical, regulatory, and policy issues. Among his other roles, he has served as President of the Radio Advisory Board of Canada for 3 years. He's also the past chair of the Canadian Electronics and Communications Association, known as CISA. And he holds a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering, as well as an MBA from McGill University. Our agenda today is focused on the topic of 5G. We've divided up the presentation into 5 different questions, which you'll see outlined here. So what, first of all, is 5G? How is 5G relevant to smart cities? Who is leading the race to 5G, and why is it even called a race? And what is the government's role in 5G? And what in particular is Canada doing? You can send comments and questions to me. I will see them as a moderator, and I will endeavor to leave some time at the end of our session, which runs until 1:45 p.m. To address some of those questions. Okay, so our first question was, what is 5G? So 5G is a catchphrase that is on everyone's lips, it seems. You're an electrical engineer by training. What is 5G and why is it happening?
Thank you, Monica. Just want to do a sound check. Can you hear me? Okay. Again, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm very pleased to be here at this event and to have the opportunity to talk about this important topic of smart cities and 5G. Before I even start, I just want to express that I listened to the previous session, and those are very nice segue into this the session that we have in front of us here. In the previous discussion, we see a lot of application use cases from drones to autonomous vehicle and so on and so forth. So I think this session is going to be nicely fit into the whole of the program today. In terms of 5G and smart city, on a very high level, the way we see 5G, how it's related to smart city, again, we're going to go into a lot of details later on, is that 5G is going to provide the connectivity layer for all the application and the use cases that we've heard this morning or so far. 5G is a flexible platform to provide a secure, reliable, and predictable connectivity for those applications. So that's kind of very high level how 5G fit into smart city and so on and so forth. So let's go back to the question about what is 5G. Again, like you said, that's the top of everyone's tongues and list. But let's try to define what is 5G. And in order to define 5G, I like to take us back into the past. To look at the evolution of mobile phone communication. And for those who are old enough, gray hair like me, I think we can recall, the car phones. Those are the phones that actually installed in cars. If you open up the trunk, there's a whole bunch of equipment in the trunk, antenna, transmitter, receiver, and that battery, and then you have the handset very close to the driver. That's the car phone. But from the car phone, then we have a portable mobile phone around the year 1980. And the portable mobile phone is usually in the shape of a small briefcase or a large brick, and that is, we call it the first generation mobile phone, or 1G. This kind of phone is based on purely on analog technology, and the sole purpose is to provide voice communication between person to person, and that's it. I think at that time, Ericsson had maybe 3 phones to share between 200 people. So, we share the phone and we play for a week or two. Well, that's very limited availability, very expensive. Moving on to the next generation, we call it the second generation, or 2G. That's when digital technology was introduced. The phone definitely getting smaller. The shape, the form factor is usually a candy bar or clamshell. I guess the most important thing is that beside voice communication, we see the introduction of data and text messages. So this is the first time that we can see people using their phone to text message back and forth with the second generation. On the aspects of data, we see very low data rate in the order of 10 kilobits, tens of kilobits per second. It's not very high. But interestingly, even with this low data rate, there's a flagship Canadian company that we never forget. It's called Research in Motion. These guys actually managed to port their messaging and email application from their private data network onto the public 2G networks. Again, the point here is that they have a private data network, but they port our application on the 2G networks. So they're making use of the data capability on the 2G networks. This is after the fact, right? 2G was not invented for BlackBerry or RIM devices, but they use that. And also around this time, we saw the introduction of the first iPhone, the touch screen, and web browsing is pretty lousy because the data speed is very low, but it's still significant. Moving on to the next generation, third generation mobile phone. This is when we have a good web browsing experience. The data rates increased a lot. Again, we're talking about 100 kilobits per second. And then, voice communication is still the main driver. But around that time, we see the introduction of the first iPhone based on 3G. We call iPhone 3G. That's the first name. The reason I mentioned about the iPhone, because again, the networks is there, and people try to make use of network capability using different devices, try to build on top of that different services. Web browsing is good, text message, a little bit of data communication. Moving on to the year roughly 2010, that's when we had the fourth generation of mobile phone, or 4G. At this time, we had the true multimedia capability in the system and in the devices. This is when you can see web browsing, fantastic web browsing, video, picture, and multiple services. The data, it has increased a lot. We're talking about in the range average about 50 megabits per second. Again, this is average. Of course, we still have text and voice and everything else. So that is a little bit of the history of the mobile phone from 1G, 2G, 3G to 4G. I'm going to stop here for a bit because I think we need to highlight the common thread within this generation. Basically, these networks was designed with the sole intention of increased performance, mainly the two aspects: higher speed, larger bandwidth, and that's it. You know, the industry just had the mindset of increase the performance of the networks and the device, so on and so forth. There's no pre-planning or preconception of what kind of service is going to be there on top. All the services and anything come is basically after the fact. People just say, okay, this is the capability of the networks. What can I make use of that? And that's when with 4G, you see a lot of new applications. You know, nobody had thought about, like the Uber, the Airbnb, social media, and so on and so forth. So the point I'm trying to make here is that up to 4G, application use cases are afterthought. I mean, the primary target of the industry is to improve performance. Moving on to the next slide.
Okay, so the thank you. So the G stands for generation.
Thank you.
You've added this slide. What is going on in this image? Why have you added this?
You know, this is an old slide. You know, if you see the date, 2016. You know, 5 years old. This is not new. But I find it's very striking in the sense that around this time, you know, when people look at this picture, it's like, wow, this is a weird, you know, a picture with, you know, Hillary Clinton supporter face showing their backs towards her, and they're taking picture. And of course, we know eventually we have a name that coined for this behavior is selfie. The point I'm trying to make is technology is there, and technology actually change people's behavior. Right? I mean, we use technology in the way that is not predicted, even predicted by the designer, by the engineer, by the network operators. Right? So it is very strange phenomenon. You know, I think it's interesting to look at how people use technology in a way that is not predictable. And again, I'm going back to my point about the networks up until 4G. They are designed with the sole intention of improved performance. There's no you know, pre-planning of what kind of application. You know, during the third generation and the fourth generation, the time that we introduced that 2 generations, there's always a question: what is the killer app? How are we going to make use of that much data? You know, at that time, that was a big pipe of data. How are we going to do that, and how the operator is going to make money? So there's a lot of question about monetization of the network. How can we monetize the network? What kind of application? And of course, now we hear the term, the app economy, like you see the Uber, the Airbnb, social media, everything is based on the mobile network. So again, my point here is that the networks are designed, and then user, application provider come up with application and use cases for the first, second, third, and fourth generation networks.
So the technology that enabled the coining of the term selfie in 2012, 2013 was, first of all, the front-facing camera, as well as the necessary speed and bandwidth in mobile network operators' networks. And then it wasn't until users got a hold of it and created this application that we found the applications that justified all the massive investments that went into mobile network operators networks. So there's a factor of unpredictability in all this, isn't there?
I think that's a good point. Actually, the front-facing camera was up by Sony Ericsson way back in 2004 or something. I don't remember. That was in the 2G time frame. But of course, the cameras with VGA low resolution, and the network is not good enough to support video. So I guess the handset is a little bit ahead of time, but not until you have the 4G network that's capable of sending video back and forth, sending picture, download video, streaming video, then the front-facing camera is really, really useful. But that's a good point, Monica. So the network and the devices have to work together. You need to have end-to-end capability to support certain kind of application and use cases.
Okay, so tell me, is the 5th generation just the next generation, or as this slide or the title of this slide posits, is 5G not just another G? What's your view?
So we're talking about 5G and how 5G is different from the previous generations. Again, I'm going back to the point that the previous generation designed with a sole purpose of improved performance of the network in capacity, speed, and bandwidth, and so on and so forth. With 5G, it's completely different. 5G is designed with application and use case in mind. What I'm trying to say is that the industry sit down and decide what kind of application, what kind of use cases I need to support. Based on the application and use cases, they define the network capabilities required to support those application and use cases. And then once you have the capabilities, then of course you can sit down and write the technical spec to meet those network capabilities. So it's kind of a use case and application driven design. It's not a network capabilities driven design. So if I look at this picture here, at the bottom you have enhanced mobile fixed broadband. The 3 clusters that we're looking at are basically grouped into 3 different categories of application and use cases. So at the bottom you have enhanced fixed and mobile broadband. And if you look at the pentagons, the different pentagons in the picture there, you have applications that require large bandwidth, higher speed download and upload data. For example, the VR, AR, enterprise connectivity, sport venues, when you have large number of people connected, and then you have 4K, 8K high video. So those are the applications that require large bandwidth, high speed data. So we group them into one cluster. And the way I look at this cluster is very similar to 4G, but I call the term 4G on steroids, higher bandwidth, faster speed upload and download. On the right-hand side, there's different clusters. We call them critical IoT. IoT stands for Internet of Things. These are the applications that require certain capabilities. Those capabilities are low latency, high reliability, and very high availability. Again, we're talking about remote control machine, remote surgery, controlling robots, and traffic control. So that's one corner of the application. On the left-hand side, we have massive IoT. Again, with massive IoT, there's certain capabilities that is needed. For example, low cost, low energy, small data volumes that send back and forth, and massive number of connected devices. When we talk about application, these are talking about sensor that monitor different condition of the environment, or asset management, or fleet management, You don't have to send the data all the time. The device could wake up once in a while and send a tiny bit of data and go back to sleep. So there's 3 different clusters and clearly 3 different categories of application and use cases. And based on these application and use cases, 5G define different capabilities and therefore the technical standards written in that way. So that's how 5G is designed, and that is different from the previous generations.
So in our previous panel, the shuttle that TTC is piloting, would that engage all 3 of these different capabilities of 5G, or is it more focused on one or the other of the 3?
That's a very good question. I mean, I listened to the TTC discussion, is very fascinating. And I was about to ask what kind of connectivity they use, and they go on and they answer. So they use LiDAR and radar, so different connectivity. I think the difference between 5G and LiDAR and radar is that 5G use dedicated spectrum. So we're talking about QoS, predictability, and timely delivery of data packages. So that's to me that's a key difference. In terms of different IoT, so if you're talking about sensor around the bus and make sure that the bus is driving the right lane, I think that's critical IoT. You need to have that. The bus needs to be driving in the right lane, right direction, and so on and so forth, and stop at the right time. But at the same time, maybe if you have a video camera inside the bus to monitor passenger, of course, you need to cover the face and everything for privacy. But you want to see how many people actually in the bus, then you need to have that camera. That camera doesn't have to be very fast reactive, but it needs to have broadband. You can send video back and forth. So that's a different application. So those are just 2 examples. I remember one of the example, and I think Erickson is talking about that, is the tandem buses. So you have 3 buses driving, and then you have only 1 driver, or you control only the bus in front, and the 2 just tag along, because at that time you need to have high capacity vehicles, so you tag 3 buses together. But during off-peak hours, you only need to use 2 or 1. And the connection between the buses had to be highly sensitive in terms of time and highly reliable. So that's another kind of IoT application. So I think that's a good question, Monica. And again, in different application, you could have different kind of IoT connected devices.
Got it. Okay, so moving on then to address the burning questions of this audience, how is 5G relevant to smart cities? And I guess it's a natural segue from the discussion we've just been having.
Yeah, I'm just if you move on to the next slide, I think I have a slide that explains how 5G is relevant to smart cities. So, in terms of providing the connectivity, so we're talking about 5G provide a reliable, predictable, and timely, predictable fashion to deliver the data package. And within 5G, you have different segments of IoT. So the first 2 segment is, first segment is massive IoT. So we're talking about a very large number of devices, and with low data rate, low bandwidth, and send data not all the time, but maybe periodically. Actually, this is a capability that's already supported by 4G. So if you look at the very bottom of the picture, you see LTE and NR. LTE is the same thing as 4G. NR, the engineer cannot come up with any good name, so NR stands for new radios, which is 5G. That's at the very bottom of the slide. So that's a capability that 4G only support. But of course, with 5G, you're talking about 10 times the number of devices, 10 times the battery life, and so on and so forth. So 4G was enhanced by 5G. I'm not going to go through every single segment, but on the right-hand side to the extreme right, you have industrial automation. This is a capability that only 5G can meet. So you're talking about timely sensitive, very low latency, and synchronization between different robots, and even synchronization of location. So this is in the application of PCL, programmable logic control, or advanced automation, or replacement of cables between machinery. So when you have cable connection, it's not easy to reconfigure the manufacturing floor. With wireless, you can do a lot more. You have the freedom to move things in and out, and it depends on what kind of production you want to have. So this is highly time sensitive, highly reliable, and highly predictable. So that's on the right hand side. And of course, you have the broadband IoT and critical IoT. The point I'm trying to make here is that we segment the IoT application into 4 different segments. The first 2 can be supported by 4G, but greatly enhanced with the 5G capabilities. The second 2 segments can only be supported by 5G. So that's in smart city application. You ask the question, even for bus management, you can see many different IoT applications. So it depends on which segment, then you use different capability of 5G. And
All right. So,
go ahead.
no, you go ahead. This is obviously an application.
No, again, I just want to use one example in smart city related to traffic management to illustrate the point of, even for traffic management, you need to have different kind of IoT application here. So for example, the traffic volume monitoring, you have sensor that monitoring traffic, and perhaps you need to have live feed camera to make sure that you know exactly what is going on. Let's say if there's an accident, you can detect how serious the accident, then you can decide to send different trucks, vehicles. Either you can send a couple of police cars, or you want to send ambulance, or you can just send fire trucks. So that greatly you try to be more efficient when dealing with different accidents. And of course, the sensor that monitor the traffic has to be connected to the traffic light, so that you can divert traffic in a very efficient way. And the last at the bottom is that you have smart parking. You want to avoid, you want to reduce the consumption, the generation of CO2 by having people driving around looking for parking spot. So smart parking gonna basically monitor the parking spot available and send it to the vehicles, and driver can drive directly to that location. So that's reduce driving time, reduce congestion, and reduce the amount of CO2 generated from the drivers. So this is a very simple case of smart city related to traffic management. And even within traffic management, you already see different types of IoT devices.
Okay, I want to move quickly through the next couple of slides so that we can deal with our third question, which was who's leading in the race to 5G and why is it a race? So just we've got a couple of other use cases or explanations of different use cases of 5G here, I believe.
Again, this is to illustrate different IoTs even in one environment. So in this case, we're talking about smart factory, smart manufacturing here. So you have inventory management. That's when you have massive IoT, low cost, low energy consumption, low data rate kind of device. And at the bottom on the purple box, we have collaborative robotics. That's when you have, industrial IoT application, again, sensitive in terms of time and reliable, so that the robot can talk to each other. So again, the point here is that even for one environment, you're looking at different type of IoT. So very similar to the previous slide. And this slide, what I'm trying to say is that these are the actual implementation that we have today. Ericsson, and like any other equipment manufacturer or service provider, we have implemented 5G in many environments. Smart factory, we have a live smart factory in Louisville and Tallinn, Estonia. We have 5G in the mine in Sweden, and actually in Canada, we start with 4G, but they're looking at 5G. Smart Port, Rotterdam, and Livorno, Italy. So again, it's no longer science fiction. 5G and 4G connectivity are happening in different in the vertical industry, and that brings a lot of benefit to those industries.
All right. So our next question is, who is leading the race to 5G? I'm just going to interrupt here briefly. I'm not able to see the chat box, so I'm not sure if there are any questions from the audience. But if I could ask Stacy to send those through to me by email, then perhaps I can see those.
We don't have any questions, Monica. I've got an eye on it, and I'll let you know if anything pops up.
Okay, thank you. Canada used to be a leader in the 4G space in terms of the quality and the speed of its networks. How is Canada faring now in what I'll call the race to 5G?
I guess look globally, looking at different things in different countries are doing on a macro scale. We see few leading countries, clearly China, some Asian countries like South Korea, Japan, and US are the leading countries when it comes to 5G. China, when we talk about installed base station, the number of base station and the number of subscribers, clearly because of the population and because of early adoption, they have the highest number of subscribers, highest number of installed base station. In the U.S., actually, they're not trailing that far. They're actually catching up. In many study and survey, including by the one from Ericsson and by Wall Street Journal, we expect that the U.S. is going to catch up with China on the metrics of installed base and subscriber per capita. We cannot compare the total number, but I guess we have to compare it per capita. So it's to say that the 5G rate is still ongoing. There's no clear winner when it comes to which country is the winner when it comes to 5G race. There's a lot of investment. There's a lot of activities going on around the world. Again, I mentioned China, US, Asian countries, and so on and so forth. When we talk about Canada, it's not possible to talk about the number of installed base, but I think I need to look at the quality of the network, and I extract the data from the open signal study, and what it shows is that Canada was leading in 4G, one of the top countries, but now we're kind of behind. There's several reasons for that we can discuss later, but the point is that at this point in time, Canada is kind of behind when it comes to 5G.
Okay, and I guess the question is, why does it matter? Can we talk about what is this slide explaining? What's it doing in my 5G presentation?
So I guess we look at the different use case and application and how 5G had to do that. But if we take one step back and look at a very big picture here, in the past we see different industrial revolution. I don't know if we have time to go through everything, but the first one is that the invention of the steam engine. This evolution basically impact the creation of products and services and the delivery of products and services. But more importantly, it impacts how enterprise organize and impact labor force as well. So drastic implication to different aspects of society. So the first one is that the steam engine. The second one is electricity and mass production. You're talking about Ford invented the mass production, the chains, and also the division of labor. You have different people doing different specialized tasks and so on and so forth. The third one, again, I'm going really quickly. I know that we kind of short of time. The third one is quite interesting. If we talk about using electronics, ICT, not for the intention of communication, but to automate production. And that's drastically changed the efficiency of production. We see that the improvement of productivity you produce better quality and better timing. Back in 2016, the professor Klaus Schwab, he's the founder of the World Economic Forum. He coined the term the fourth industrial revolution. And he believed that we are at the brink of a new industrial revolution because there's three aspects. The change is happened so far, unprecedented. The scope of the change is very large. This impacts a number of industry and every countries that we can think of. The depth and the breadth of changes is that this impact the whole industry from production, manufacturing, governance, how you deliver. So in terms of industry, it impacts from top to bottom. So those three aspects, he said that, we are witnessing the fourth industrial revolution here. And he looked at the fusion of a number of technology breakthroughs that includes artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, digital twinning that we discussed earlier this morning, robotics, Internet of Things, autonomous vehicle, 3D printing, nanotechnology, quantum computing. So a wide range of breakthrough technology that fuse together, that accelerate the change and magnify the change. So we look at, this is clearly a fourth industry revolution. It's not a continuation of the third one. And 5G clearly is a component of the number of technology that I mentioned earlier, like augmented reality, virtual reality, digital twinning, robotics, Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles. So 5G is going to be the connectivity layers for the technology. So it's important to be ahead or to be advanced in 5G for the country's competitiveness. That's have a lot of implication on GDP and job growth. But that's how 5G is important.
All right. So we only have 4 minutes left, unfortunately, Veet. So I think we're going to this was our closing second last segment dealing with what can government do to facilitate 5G. And then talk about what Canada has done or is doing. So I think instead of moving through any further slides, we'll just quickly touch on these 4 ideas on what the government could actually do to help facilitate and speed up 5G adoption, rollout and adoption in Canada. So did you want to take these, Veet, or
I can start with the first item. We know that spectrum is a lifeblood of wireless network. So it's important that we have access to the right spectrum. And in 5G, we need to have access to low frequency spectrum, mid frequency spectrum, and high frequency spectrum to deliver a wide range of IoT applications. From broadband to critical IoT applications. So it's important that we have access to the right spectrum at the right time. That's the first point. Because of high frequency spectrum we use in 5G, the coverage is a lot shorter. So we need to have a larger number of antenna sites. And that's when we need to have access to infrastructure to install the antenna site. And maybe you can comment on that. Monica.
Sure, yeah. So infrastructure access is something that is near and dear to my practice, and it's obviously critical, particularly critical for 5G, because in a conventional network rollout or service, the number of access points in a 5G network is going to be exponentially greater than in a 4G network. And so there are things that have been done by governments such as the US government to help facilitate more rapid 5G deployments by streamlining processes and procedures for infrastructure access. And encouragingly, the Ontario government in Bill 257, tabled and passed this year, has followed suit by facilitating and removing barriers to access to electricity distribution assets for purposes of 5G and mobile communications deployment. So what about broadband funding? I know that we have an entire panel devoted
exactly.
to
I just want to
that.
mention that this is a really good thing, because without that, we're not going to see coverage for remote and rural and areas.
Yeah.
One is that I think the policy needs to be technology agnostic between fiber, wireless, and satellite, depends on the requirements of the specific scenario. So, but in overall, this is something that is needed for sure.
Okay. And then finally, a quick word on your bullet here on research and innovation funding. What does that refer to?
So
What's the
again,
role?
if we look at the leading countries, they have the national program for 5G, and one of the component of national program is about research and innovation. They fund different initiatives when it comes to research and innovation. It's important to in 5G even more than before, because we're talking about not only research on the tech connectivity itself, but research and innovation on the vertical application. That's where you get the most benefits from 5G. So in Canada, we have a program called ANCOR, ENCQOR. This is funded by 3 governments: Quebec, Ontario, and federal. And the 5 industries: Ericsson, CNA, IBM, CGI, and Thales, the French-based company. And we're looking at the renewal. This is a 5-year program. It's going to terminate sometime next year, March next year, and we're looking at renewal with expanded scope, looking into research and innovation in the vertical industry application. And there's also a component of talent in there. So to me, this is something that's fantastic happening in Canada. It's an envy from an international point of view. If you look at different international publications, they actually talk about the info program that we have in Canada.
Okay. So I think this is the end of our time. Our Master of Ceremonies, Katrina, is on. So thank you so much, Reed, for joining me this afternoon for this discussion. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both, Monica and Viet. We very much appreciate hearing from you and the time you took to walk us through 5G and who's winning and losing that race. I think everyone is curious to see when things, will move in that direction more quickly in Canada and more broadly. So I thank you again. Our next panel will explore expanding high-speed internet across Canada, somewhat related, obviously, as a topic. And we're welcoming back my partner, Michael Leggett. I've already outlined Michael's bio earlier today, so I won't take you through it again. But for those who may be joining us for the afternoon sessions, I will just briefly say that Michael is a co-founder of the Dentons Canada Smart Cities think tank. He centers and focuses his practice on corporate and commercial law, corporate governance, mergers and acquisitions, public-private partnerships, smart cities, and the transportation industry. And welcome, Michael. I'll turn it over to you to introduce your co-panelists, John, and start us off. Thank you both.
So welcome, and we've got a half an hour to chat. I'll run through your bio so everybody has a fix on who you are and what you've done, and then we can get into some questions. So John is the Chief Investment Officer of Canada Infrastructure Bank. He leads the investment team, is responsible for implementing the bank's investment and advisory strategy, including transaction advice to public sponsors, transaction structuring, capital deployment, and asset management. John's team members actively work with public sponsors across Canada at all levels of government to develop project priorities and build opportunities for partnership with the private and institutional investors. John's recognized as a leader in the Canadian infrastructure sector and has for more than 20 years of experience in lending and structuring, advising on project finance and public-private partnership transactions across a variety of infrastructure asset classes. He has extensive experience advising both public and private sector organizations active in the infrastructure sector, and was instrumental in advising on many first of kind PPP projects in Canada. Somewhat tragically, John started his career practicing law at Torrey's, which was one of our major competitors. But he wisely went on to being the managing partner of PwC's infrastructure and government services team in Canada. And I was founding and managing Investec Bank's project and infrastructure finance presence in North America. So, John, let's set the stage. Maybe you could tell our audience a bit about the bank's long-term vision, particularly focused on broadband and getting more granular into the specific project that you've just initiated.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. First of all, it's good to see you again. It's been a little while, given the state of the world, since we've had an opportunity to get together. So it's great. And the last thing I'll say before I dive right in is, and there was no Dentons way back then when I was at the other guys. So anyway, I hope I get a pass. So look, for those of you who don't know much about the bank, the bank was really formed by the government on the premise that the infrastructure gap in this country is too big for either the private sector or the public sector to fill alone. That's really the premise behind the bank. And so the notion was, how can we create an organization that will bring the principles of disciplined investing, whether be it by lending, equity, we can play anywhere in the capital structure of a deal, and catalyze along with us private sector capital to come in and facilitate infrastructure projects being built that would otherwise have a tough time getting built or getting off the ground. And that's really the notion. And so what are some of the parameters? Really quickly, we don't do grants at all. We are investors, and we expect our base case always has a return of our capital, and then at whatever prescribed return that is in each specific deal. We need private capital in every deal alongside us. So in other words, we couldn't do a loan to a public sector body across the country or just have them contribute to some sort of SPV structure and have us contribute, and that's it. That doesn't work for us. We do need bona fide private sector capital or institutional capital. We lump in institutional with private sector capital. In terms of size, this is a question we get asked quite a lot. We have $35 billion to invest, and it's really tough to do that $10 million at a time, as you might imagine. And so we don't like to paint a hard line on this or draw a hard line in the sand, but we're looking generally at a CIB investment of about $100 million minimum. And so when you factor in that we need private capital in that, and sort of the percentages where our comfort level lies as disciplined investors, that generally means you're looking at a project in the $200 million range plus. Now, there are exceptions. We have programmatic exceptions to those numbers. We're trying to be responsive, and we're trying to be realistic. We really are focused on action and getting deals closed. And so we are in 3 programs that are exceptions to that rule. One is building retrofits, which has a minimum of about $25 million. The other is zero emission buses, which is in about $20 million range. That's to allow for smaller municipalities and school bus operators, et cetera. And the third one is really important. We wanted to have an impact on Indigenous communities, closing the Indigenous community infrastructure gap. it doesn't take you a long time to figure out that having a $200 million capital requirement for projects doesn't get you to do very many Indigenous community infrastructure projects. And so we've really adapted our process to allow for us to make a minimum $5 million investment. And that covers off a lot of energy needs in Indigenous communities. It covers off some broadband needs in Indigenous communities, and water wastewater type treatment plants, which allows us to do that without otherwise. A couple of other interesting aspects about the bank. We're an impact investor. A lot of people say they're impact investors. We are actually an impact investors. When we use the letters ROI at the CIB, the I is not necessarily a dollar number. It is not based on a return on our money, but we're outcomes based. So part of the outcomes that we look for, part of our return on our investment are GHG emissions, our connectivity for how many households and premises are now achieving high speed. How many do we help to get to high speed that weren't previously connected? Connectivity of communities through public transit. All sorts of outcomes that way, but we are very firmly outcomes focused over actual dollar return focused, and that's a key part for us. The last thing I'll say is on sort of who we are is that we require projects that we invest into to be revenue generating, and the rationale for that is pretty easy to understand. Once you accept that we are investors and need a return of our capital, we need private capital in the deal, and they need a market return for their capital and their investment. There needs to be a source to repay that money. And so we hope that by choosing the right projects, by catalyzing the right money in, by being smart in the way we structure and work with our public sector partners across the country, to get a lot more done. And so far so good. We have achieved enormous success after what I'll candidly refer to as a bit of a failure to launch in the early days. I think that's not a secret, but I also believe that was very structural, and it was a live and learn scenario. There's a lot about our governance that stood in the way of us getting things done. That has since been corrected, and I think the results are speaking for themselves. To date, we have approved investments of about $6.3 billion, and we've attracted approximately $6.7 billion in private institutional capital alongside us. And we're headed towards a trajectory of committing to investing $4 to $5 billion a year over over the long term. So that's who we are, where we are. Segueing into broadband, we have 4, 5, I guess, approved sectors that we play in. So it's important to say we are not all things to all people. We were never designed to be that way. We're in public transit, trade and transportation, green infrastructure, clean power, and broadband. And our initial foray into broadband, Michael, our initial mandate, the government asked us to try and help with the government commitment to connect every Canadian to high-speed internet, which I'm sure most people on this call will know the CRTC defines as 50/10 in terms of download speeds, upload speeds, I should say. So that's who we are. That's what we do, and the focus of this session again is broadband connectivity. So, Michael, I'm happy to talk a little bit more specifically about what we're looking for in that space, or the one deal that's public so far. I'll be guided by you on what you want me to address next.
So why don't you talk about the one deal, and then we'll step back and look at the different components that go into putting together a broadband deal.
Sure. So the one announced and closed deal that we have is we call Southern Manitoba Fiber. It is with a small and growing, a small but growing ISP called Valley Fiber. I think I love to tell this story because it is exactly the poster child for what I hope will be more to come. I got a call one day from the Manitoba government who said, we have this really excellent local provider. They need some money because they're capital constrained, and we all know the challenges, the capital challenges of reaching, getting to hard to reach places in broadband. We connected, and I really liked what I heard. These people clearly knew what they were talking about, clearly were good at what they do, but they asked me for something like, I forget what the number was, some like $8 million or something like that. And I said, that's a problem. It's a problem for us because that's not the business we're in. We're trying to have impact. This is a real problem in this country. And the more we got to talking, the more it occurred to me to ask them, well, what's your 5-year plan? Let's forget about what you need for next year. What's your 5-year plan, your 10-year plan? What's your growth trajectory overall? And in the course of that discussion, you know, I like to think that I encourage them to think big. And it's not often that particularly smaller ISPs are in a conversation where the person with money on the other side says, assume there's no capital constraint. Assume money's not a problem. That doesn't happen very often. That's the conversation that I had with them. And that's in fact the conversation I have with many smaller providers. And you know, they ultimately put together a plan that was good enough and credible enough to attract an external large global investor also to the table. And at the end of the day, we invested in a project that is going to connect between 45 and 50,000 homes in southern Manitoba. The CIB investment is about $164 million in that investment. And I think it's structured in a way to allow for them to share the risk with us on uptake, get to those hard to reach premises, and importantly for us, not rely overtly on grant funding, which is a big part of broadband connectivity in this country and getting deals done. So we really love the result of that collaboration, and we're encouraging people that see themselves in a similar vein to give us a shout and chat with us.
So let's just look at the different players here and the components and how they play together. Looking first at the federal government and its role. It's CIB has focused $2 billion on large-scale broadband projects. ISED has the Universal Broadband Fund. CRTC has a fund. There's probably 2 or 3 other sources of funding for the broadband space. How does CIB play together with those partners?
That's a great question. When we started to investigate how we could play, our natural instinct was to create our own strategy. One of the things we recognized very clearly from our discussions with the sector is that it was too fractured already. There were too many different programs, and there was some confusion out there about who could access what, and they were done in different ways. And so the conclusion we quickly came to at that point in time is that we shouldn't go out there and create further confusion, but while retaining the right and I think the ability to do deals on our own, like we did with Valley Fiber, we also began to collaborate very substantially with all those other government programs. And so what the result of that was that we have worked very closely with our colleagues in Ottawa at ISED on the UBF. They were very welcoming of our participation. We came up with a strategy to try and encourage large projects, because again, we need that impact and we need the big dollar numbers in order for us to play. They involved us in the formulation of UBF. We began to have discussions with whatever ISP wanted to speak with us about it. And to this day, UBF and the awards and announcements, of course, got interrupted by the election. I think you're going to see a resumption of that very quickly. And along with that, there'll be some indications of some projects that we're working on together. So with UBF, really, we have done quite a sophisticated calculation at the CIB, where we recognize that the harder to reach places are going to require just concessionary capital like ours. But if you look at especially some of the larger ISPs, some of them who are who are the credit worthiness is investment grade, they can borrow these days at pretty compelling rates. And so having us come along and say, well, we'll give you a loan at 1% doesn't in and of itself do it unless we had some added value in terms of structuring, in terms of the risks that we take, in terms of the way we structure repayment. But even still, there's generally for larger projects a requirement to have some element of grant capital in addition to our concessionary capital for the harder to reach places. And so we have partnered, there's several that again, you'll hear more about in the very near future. And we have partnered to actually create this tripartite investment where we have capital from the ISPs, some grant funding, and then some investment from us. And we do an analysis internally called cost to Canada of connecting. And so there's actually quite a sophisticated financial optimization in terms of how many homes or premises you can connect, and depending on the interest rate charge and the term that you attribute to that and so on, the amount of grant capital you need versus concessionary loan capital. And so there's a lot of work in the background to figure out to optimize that and allow ISED's UBF money to actually go as far as it can possibly go, and allow us to step into the fray to help spread that money further so we can pick up the slack on the larger projects. So that's ISED and UBF. We're also working with the current project that I know a lot of people on this call will be very interested in is Ontario. Ontario's program is coming soon. We are we're in discussions with Ontario about how to play an effective and helpful role in alongside of them. There aren't a lot of other formal processes going on right now in the country, but we are in discussions with virtually all of the provinces and some municipalities, frankly, with that have unique challenges and unique needs. So all of that, along with discussions with the ISPs, mostly large ones, just because of the size parameter that we have. I will be clear and upfront about that. But again, going back to my opening example with Valley Fiber, I would welcome discussions with ISPs of all sizes to see if there's something creative we can't do.
Well, it sounds like you've addressed the silos. The next thing I'm interested in is the role of the public sector sponsors. Do they have to initiate projects, or is it the private sector that does that? The private sector, do they have to marry with the public sector before they go to CIB? Do the public sector have to play an active role, or can it be a passive role? For example, in the Manitoba fiber project, it almost looks like the public sector are the beneficiaries, but the players are the private sector and CIB.
I think that's right. I mean, I think that's right. I would say it's just a slight tweak on what you said. I would say the beneficiaries are the 50,000 homes that are getting connected, not the public sector. And so the people that are in those, and broadband is one of those, one of the more unique sectors that we play in, because as a general rule in this country, broadband is delivered by the private sector, as opposed to all of the other sectors that we play in, or most of the other sectors that we play in. So it gets kind of a unique treatment in that regard. And so how do projects come to us? How are they initiated? Who initiates the conversation? From all over the place, from public sector entities or organizations that realize they have a problem in their province, municipality, region, whatever it is, from ISPs who say, we have a plan, we would like to connect this, but the economics don't work. we don't know what we're going to get from UBF, or when we first started talking to them, we don't know when UBF is going to launch, was, you know, and what the parameters would be, how much money they would get. So we entered into some of those discussions. I think, you know, I want to raise something that's very, very important to us. The last speaker, I caught the last 10 minutes of the last speaker, and he said it, he thought it was important that we are technology agnostic in growing the broadband, and we are. I want to make that very, 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 very clear. I mean, it has to be a proven technology, but we are technology agnostic. Now, does that mean we'll fund anything anywhere? No. It means we're looking for the best solution, the optimal solution, given the geography that is to be connected. And sometimes that's going to be fixed wireless. I mean, obviously, we would rather pay more now to future-proof with high-quality fiber. I mean, I think that's a given. But that's not always possible. It's not always possible, and not always desirable, depending on where we're talking about. So we are technology agnostic, but we're going to try and optimize the technology used. That's the one thing. In terms of business model, look, we are actively in discussions and considering internally all sorts of models, from, you know, the UBF type. I mean, traditionally in this country, the ISPs just, you know, they go ahead and they fund it with grant money and so on, and they own the wires and they provide the services, and that's the way it's done. We have been doing significant research on other models. We are very welcoming of those discussions. Other models that could include a separation, for instance, of what we call, you know, wires and services, and a sort of utility model where somebody could own and pay for the connection, the backbone and last mile even, and then make that infrastructure available to service providers. And that model has an interesting spin on it as well, because that could be a private sector owner of that backbone, and that lends itself quite nicely to a typical P3 type model. But it could also be a municipality. It could also be a public sector model, and you know, hence the whole utility model where they could regulate rates and so on. So there's, you know, there's a lot of granular thinking that has gone into that, which is too deep for a session and the time we have today. But I wanted to mention that we are very open to all of those types of models. We are actively considering them, and have done enormous amounts of research on many of them, and would welcome discussions with anybody who is also thinking along those lines.
So let's talk about the broadband as a utility model. And that's in the context of a very difficult business case.
Yeah.
So you look at Manitoba Fiber,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in southern Manitoba, and there's lots of people. And so when you talk about revenue generation, there's lots of, it's a relatively, there's 2,000 kilometers of wire, but it's relatively contiguous, and there's a lot of potential revenue. But if you look north in Manitoba, if you look at the 150 communities in northern Manitoba, where it would take you 4,500 kilometers to connect them, in some cases, to very, very small communities. So you're
Right.
going to drive relatively small revenue. And so how do you have those two things come together? Part of the government's mandate, big need, huge capital cost, relatively low revenue.
Yeah.
Your mandate is that there has to be a return on investment. Is that a project for you? If it is, does there have to be massive grants? If it isn't a monetary return on investment, what other kinds of things can you look to?
Yeah. Great questions. And I, you know, I'll start by hearkening back to my earlier comment that we certainly are not all things to all people. And that's a precursor to saying, you know, that extreme example of remote communities that are very expensive to reach. I think you phrased it, is that a project for you? Probably not. frankly. I mean, that's the candid and short answer. Because if you take it as a given that we need, forget a return on capital, let's just talk about a return of capital. If you just take that as a given, it's simple math to say we at least need, and we can be flexible. We can say we can pick our interest for 20 years. We can have bullet payments until year 30. We can do all sorts of massaging to the structure that make it as cheap as possible. But at the end of the day, there needs to be a certain critical mass of dollars available to repay us. And in some of those areas and in some of those projects, that simply is not possible. And so there's only one solution, and that is a massive grant injection. So we like to, the way we think about broadband is the way we think about, we think about it in three categories. There's those projects that don't need us at all. If you live here in Oakville, where I live, or in Etobicoke or in downtown Toronto, they don't need us at all. The economics kind of work for them, and then the ISPs generally do those on their own. There are the ones that are so far out there, the type you just described, Michael, that it just, we at the end of the day, we really don't make a difference. That the needs are so great and the dollar numbers are so great that that's going to fall squarely into the government category. And then there's the in between part, and that's where we're going to play with the right structuring, with the right amount of well-placed capital and well-structured capital. We can make a difference to minimize the amount of grant capital available and lead in that way and try and be helpful.
John, this has been terrific. We've run out of time. I wish we had another 2 hours. We don't, but I really appreciate you taking the time, John.
No, my pleasure. And as I say, I would encourage any of your listeners to follow up with us at any time. We're always happy to have a chat. Our process is no more formal than that. Send us an email, pick up the phone, and we'd love to engage. Thanks to you and Denton's for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very much so, John. And thank you. Thank you and Michael for heading up that very interesting session. And I think there's been a lot of that kind of collaborative energy on Zoom today, and encouraging people to connect around these topics. So I would encourage everybody to do that. Moving on then with our next session, and we're keeping to time, I am going to introduce our next panel. Our next and last session is on smart, sustainable communities from the ground up. And we have three panelists that I am pleased to introduce you to today. A lot of the audience will know Tim Kane. Tim is the Orbit Director for the town of Innisfil. Over the last 10 years, Tim has evolved to his current position after leading the growth services team at the town. His role, delivering the Innisfil Mobility Orbit, is a unique opportunity to strive for and implement next practices that tackle growth challenges and improve quality of life for Innisfil's residents. Tim plays a key role in the innovative culture at Innisfil, including the development of Innisfil Transit powered by Uber. Tim's previous life, or in his previous life, he worked as a planning consultant in Canada and in Australia, acting on behalf of national and international clients for a variety of commercial, industrial, residential, and institutional projects. Tim has a master's of environmental studies in regional planning and resource development, and honors Bachelor of Science as a registered RPP, and is a full member of the Canadian Institute of Planners. And joining Tim today, we have Michael Malenchen. Michael joined the team at the town of Innisfil in early 2020 as CFO and Director of Corporate Services and Deputy Treasurer and CFO for In Services, the town's water, wastewater, municipal service corporation. He has significant private sector experience in regional, national, and international organizations. Serving as CFO for the last 15 years, he has expertise in streamlining operations to improve processes, using lean concepts, and developing comprehensive strategic plans to help organizations succeed. Michael has closely partnered with the community, chairing several economic development and industry boards. He has worked with municipal councils to encourage businesses to expand or relocate into communities. His partnership with various colleges and universities has also helped businesses grow by adopting the latest advanced technologies into their business processes to create a competitive advantage. Michael has a passion for integrating AI, artificial intelligence, into business strategy and community development initiatives to provide better services to residents. Thank you, Michael and Tim, for joining us. And joining Michael and Tim is Natalie Volbreck. Sorry, Natalie Volbreck. You can correct me, Natalie, on the pronunciation. I apologize.
It's just
Natalie. Thanks, Natalie. I really try hard with names, but it's been a long day. Natalie is an up-and-coming designer with IBI's LA office in the field of architecture, building experience in a wide array of projects, including light rail station, residential, spa, medicine, hospitality, and office design. Natalie has proven her flexibility to function as a team member in the collaborative environment, most evident in her light rail and medical projects. She is familiar working with complicated and technical project requirements and relies on her strong BIM 3D visualization software skills to best communicate with different disciplines. Natalie's work has taken her far internationally in New York, Missouri, Toronto, and Amsterdam. This experience has given her an appreciation for architectural processes in different regions. And she is passionate about sustainable design as it impacts the triple bottom line. As a result, she has deeply studied the subject matter and holds credentials with both LEED and WELL. Welcome, Natalie, Tim, and Michael, and thank you for joining us today. As we get started, and before I turn it over to you, I did want to frame our discussion by putting forward the Denton's Smart Cities definition that is quite broad and flexible, and will, I hope facilitate your discussion, although I don't think you need much of that help. So at Denton's, we have coined the definition of smart cities as a smart city modernizes digital, physical, and social infrastructure and integrates all essential services for the benefits of its citizens by harnessing advances in sustainable technology to make delivery of these services more efficient, useful, innovative, and equitable. It begins with the particular needs and goals of a city or a community, and then aims to address those needs through advanced data analytics and efficient coordinated implementation of advanced telecommunications, sensor and camera technology, traffic control, LED street lighting, deployment of electric and autonomous vehicles, smart health services, smart buildings, and so many, many, many other technologies and services. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the three of you. Natalie, Tim, and Michael, welcome. And let's get the discussion started. Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Kat, and thanks so much for the opportunity this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be in such great company, not just this panel, but all the other panels today as well. So just before we get into the discussion, much like your definition of smart city, I guess I want to give a little more context about Orbit in the town of Innisfil. So we are about an hour north of Toronto, and it does make potentially for a good slogan, the town above Vaughan, but I'll come back to that in a moment. We have quite a few things going for us, and as a result, growth is coming our way. We have 400 Series Highway, which obviously is a big driver of growth. We have Lake Simcoe on two sides. We have a Metrolinx rail line, and just last week or the week before, a new hospital was announced right beside our town campus. So there's a lot going on, and that's principally what's driving growth into this region, and particularly into Innisfil, and those things that are driving the growth for Orbit as well. So there's two drivers for that. A few years ago, Metrolinx announced a new station, proposed GO station in the town of Innisfil, which we were super excited about. And then recently with this provincial government and the transit-oriented community model, they gave us flexibility in how that station can be delivered and designed and the neighborhoods around it. So it was a perfect time to establish, a long-term vision, part of our mantra about outcome-based thinking. What are those, what's that image, that singular image, which you can see a little bit over my shoulder, that we want to drive towards when we're making everyday decisions at the town. And a big part of that too is, what planning and technology can we weave into that and really make a difference for our residents. And that's what we're in the process of doing right now. We sure don't have the same level of information understanding that many other speakers do, but we are learning, and we're here to talk about that. And we're in the process of putting the meat on those bones with that planning process, which ultimately is going to be a 50-year plan and 150,000 people. So not happening tomorrow, but certainly looking further into the future than what we do typically. And that brings a whole set of opportunities as well. And that growth is coming from, when we decided on orbit, it was essentially growing in our terms and how we want to do that. So, currently the county is going through a growth exercise. It's going to increase our population from 40,000 now to 100,000 people in about 30 years. And we're kind of at this awkward adolescent stage, as I describe it, whereby, we're still rural, very much rural in many of the ways, but, we're getting urban expectations and we're getting a more of an urban built form. So how do we manage that transition and keep those features that we want to keep? And the reference to Vaughan wasn't an accident. They were very much where we were, less than 50 years ago, less than 30 years ago even. So, we've seen how, development can occur. And, if we choose to do that differently, then we feel that orbit is a good way to do that. And, making those purposeful decisions now that fundamentally and authentically, embed those things like inclusivity, sustainability, technology, and placemaking will pay dividends later on for us. So that's why we're here today talking about this particular project. And Mike, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, beautiful summary, Tim. I think a key thing too is that we have a clean palette. We have basically an empty farm field with a single train track running through the middle of it. So we have the world's our oyster in this case. So we really want to catapult off that. But doing the planning and everything right now, like Innisfil's a great organization. Myself, I've only been there for a year and a half. One of my reasons and attractions were because it was so creative, innovative municipality that took on some really unique things. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of them, Tim, if I'm touch on some of the kind of the cool things that we've done. Like Tim sort of spearheaded our transit system, which is a partnership with Uber. So really great mobility as service initiative that's really taken off. I think we're one of the first municipalities to do that. From a finance side, I think we're the only municipality in Canada, if not North America, to accept Bitcoin for property tax payments. Just trying to look at we're exploring prototyping of autonomous sidewalk snow plows, intelligent streetlight to help us with sensor technology to tell us if our garbage cans are full, if there's an empty parking spot, and tie that all back into sort of app technology to help residents and visitors quickly find a spot to park near one of our beaches. There's just a lot. We have a really unique accelerator called the DMZ. It's focusing on GovTech, so government technologies to support municipalities. And really that's an economic development tool for us, to have these type of businesses settle in Innisfil. So it's some really unique initiatives that we're starting off with. And I think that's what is sort of spearheading the orbit. It's going to be one big experiment for us of creativity and innovation that I think we're really pushing forward to and really looking forward to pushing forward to. Tim, I'm not sure if I missed anything on that list there.
No, it's fine. Thanks, man.
That's a great overview, Mike and Tim. Thank you for that. I know well before Orbit, Tim and I would occasionally chat about the great things that Innisfil was moving forward with, like the Uber solution to the transportation considerations and the use of Bitcoin or allowance of the use of Bitcoin for the payment of property taxes. Tim, it's interesting you kind of pinpointed one of the reasons that I'd asked for you to join the summit today. And it's that, you have a blank slate in creating this community. And we heard quite a bit today about existing smart cities and how they have done it well with, Barcelona and Songdo. And there are many themes that sort of continue to be a tension point or a struggle. I think starting with maybe data governance, it seems like whether we're talking about Uber or collection of data keeps coming up. So data governance, privacy challenges and that sort of thing. What are you seeing as some of the tension points that you're addressing?
Mike, do you want to? That's
yeah,
Mike.
sure.
Yeah.
The whole data governance and the privacy thing is like we're trying to take a preemptive strike on this. We don't have the technology already embedded throughout the organization, the municipality, but we want to take that preemptive strike to say, what can we do to protect our residents? As we start partnering with third-party technology providers what can we do to make sure that our residents' privacy rights are not violated? Like the accumulation of data and moving towards a surveillance capitalism type approach is not something that we want. So we've created a data governance strategy, to try and manage that and mitigate that. We've in exploring all that data governance strategy, we've come across some really unique private sector organizations, not for profit organizations, and one is called Innovate Cities out of Toronto, and they create these data trusts that lets this data and information be coalesced into one database, and it's all protected from a physical barriers, but also privacy by designs. And the unique relationship that Innovate Cities has is with Dr. Anne Kavukian, who's 3-time Privacy Commissioner Officer of Ontario, and who is the creator of privacy by design principles that have rippled around the world through GDPR in Europe. And so she's been working with us and partnering with us as a municipality, which has been a great input to try and understand her perspective and really create privacy at the source, and not wait till the later and try and anonymize it, but really do that by design. So there's one great partnership we're working at, and they create these data trusts that help us manage our data, make it accessible, make it protected for residents. And the other one is a company, a not-for-profit called Helpful Places. And they're really interesting because they've created this sort of signage taxonomy that identifies where we're using surveillance technology, and all for the purposes of transparency. There's a QR code that will identify what that piece of technology highlights, what it does, what it captures, where they can find it, who's the owner of it, and really interesting. But it's these partnerships and the exploration of these different not-for-profit organizations have really been supportive and are just taking off and helping us create our own governance strategy to really watch and manage the privacy rights of our residents, which is foremost from my mindset.
Natalie, you've worked on many projects in the United States and more broadly. What are your observations in terms of how data and privacy has been tackled in those projects that you've been involved with?
Yeah, I think data is a really interesting point of discussion, right, for smart cities, as we've already spoken a bit just now. And I think it really depends on what you're trying to measure and what that data is being used for. Right. So I think on a lot of the projects that I work on, it's oftentimes, for example, with curb space management, we're trying to collect data from TNC companies or providers like Ubers and Lyfts, and trying to use that data to better plan our cities, figure out, how much highway do we need, how much road do we need, where are we seeing congestion. And one of the things that we found a lot is that it can be really challenging to get that data from the TNC providers, because it's not data that it's commercially sensitive to them and they don't want to share it. And so that's something that I've bumped into being a challenge. And one of the solutions that's come up in kind of our research on that is the idea of a third-party data aggregator or an anonymizer. And I know, Mike, you're saying you're trying to collect data from the beginning. That is sensitive, so you don't have to anonymize the data. But I think what I'm finding with both urban and building scale projects, oftentimes there's just data embedded directly into the data, whether it's like through an image, right, a video image of cars moving around or people moving around, and it's really hard to anonymize all of that all the time. In addition to these like commercially sensitive organizations that might not want to share their data with third parties, especially government agencies. And figuring out how we can still access that data without, so if I back up a little bit, right, it's a big, I think, obstacle is Freedom for Information Act in the United States. If you, as a third-party agency or a third-party company, share data to a public agency, there is the opportunity that that information could then get released out through the Freedom for Information Act. And that's just for a lot of reasons not a good idea. And so we're finding that having that third-party aggregator allows that data to be anonymized before it gets handed over to the public agency. But it's easier said than done. Oftentimes the negotiations can get a little bit challenging. So I don't know, Mike, I'd be curious to see if kind of those are things that you've obstacles you face and how you've overcome them.
I think we're really exploring that, right? We're not down that far down the rabbit hole, but 100% those are the things that are, paramount. How do you, you're collecting this data. You obviously can't anonymize it all, right? And so how do you protect those rights? It's not just, it's the third-party vendors, but it's also our developers too. It's something we work with our developers, because developers are going to be absolutely critical to help us achieve some of this technology and put it into place. So we're striving, to create business cases for them to make them want to do it, as opposed to, force them to do it under, site plan control or permitting. And Tim, you can probably speak to this more than I can from a planning point of view, for sure.
Yeah, Mike, and the other, just going back to Natalie's point about the data sharing point of view, definitely a few years ago, with Uber, the data was front and center with respect to potential issues with the public. So, thankfully we had a relationship with Uber where, we could sit down and talk about, what our collective goals were, and what level of data we needed to do that. So, that was very powerful for us to, to get access to data that we wouldn't normally have, knowing that it was going to be advancing, those collective goals of both Uber and the town. So, finding that common ground, I think is a key message there. When we're having these talks with tech companies, quite often there is common ground there. They're not the Antichrist, despite what, we may be made to believe in the media sometimes. And maybe they are, but, I think, as long as they're there to help move your community forward, then you got to keep an open mind and find that common ground.
Tim, we mentioned Uber at the onset, and obviously that comes up in the data privacy constraints or space as well. But turning to maybe worse segue, but turning to mobility challenges, what are you seeing? What are you planning for? I know Orbit is heavily focused on the major transit station area, and in part came about because of the utilization of those policies in provincial policies and plans. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure, Kat. I think there's two questions there. One is the existing transit system that we have, and certainly we've been talking a lot about it over the last few years. And where it's at now is that thankfully it's nimble enough that we can evolve that as we're moving forward. So right now we're working with Uber about what that next step looks like. In the early days it was just getting enough ridership and enough data to provide that basic service townwide. Now that the numbers are creeping up, we need to look at ways to help save money, make that system more efficient, and build on that system as it evolves to more of a traditional transit system, particularly as we get towards densities like Orbit and more traditional urban frameworks. So it's been an interesting process for that to happen. We are looking at, the town isn't looking at individual data points, obviously, but certainly, that data is forming the backbone for, how we can look at that system and make that system evolve. And, the fun part about that process is that, our first meeting with Uber, it was one person practically in a broom closet in their old Queen Street office, and now it's a team of 200 on their transit side, which is pretty exciting. And that's, what the great thing about Orbit is to it. It represents that next test bed of where we can incorporate things like rail and personal mobility. I know, Natalie, this is near and dear to your heart as well, is that, this holy grail of mobility as a service where, ultimately one day, instead of spending $100 a month on our cell phone bill, we can spend, probably something comparable to that and just basically step seamlessly from, out of our condominium onto a train, into a shared car, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's probably one of the great things about Orbit is that, we can start creating this ecosystem for that to happen and, prepare for it and hopefully perpetuate it as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you mentioned it as well, Tim, right? That sometimes some of these TNCs and other service providers are kind of considered to be the Antichrist. And I think that can be a really traditional way of thinking about mobility. I think everything evolves over time. Like we're humans, right? We're not the same people we were back in the Middle Ages. And there's a reason for that, right? I think it's important to look at how we're evolving, how our needs are changing, and trying to find progressive solutions that still address all of those needs that we need, right? Whether it's equity, access to mobility, access to jobs, access to transportation. These are all things that matter. And there will be some stumbling blocks along the way. Not every solution is gonna that's proposed is gonna be perfect, but I think the there's a saying, right, that humanity is always leaning just a little bit towards the right, and towards progress, right? And I think we have to trust that to a certain extent and not be afraid to try new things. And I think that's really incredible that, you know, Innisfil was able to kind of arrange that partnership, and there will be a lot of evolution to that. So that's something to look out for, and I'm looking forward to that, honestly.
Great, thank you. Another form of mobility that we've covered a little bit today, but more from the construction process and kind of prop tech angle, are drones. I know from discussions with Tim and Mike, that's another area that you're you know, trying to figure out and looking at in Innisfil and maybe with Orbit, but also more broadly. Can we talk about that for a minute?
Some really exciting initiatives, you know, with different organizations out there, and you know, sort of capitalizing or, you know, creating an alternate revenue stream from your airspace. Is it a doable thing? Like the ultimate goal is to bring in revenues that can reduce the tax levy and the burden on the taxpayers. So as we move to, you know, to the air deliveries, as Amazon's taking off in a COVID world, you know, can those deliveries be done by drones, right? That's the ultimate question. And then what control do we have over our airspace? It becomes, you know, in theory, you can put these drone air matrices into your airspace, and when someone flies over, you can ding them with a toll, just like Highway 407 across Toronto. So it's doable. It's being experimented now, and we're exploring that sort of delivery aspect coming into Innisfil airspace. There are regulatory issues with Transport Canada and Nav Canada. Who owns that airspace? You know, they have to relinquish that authority over it back to the municipality. So those are things that are going to take some time, and that's more of a legal opinion. And Kat, and that's probably where we're calling you to weigh in on that kind of thing. But it's something we're exploring, you know, to monetize it if it's a possibility. But we're also looking at, you know, taking the regular pharmacy, the Shoppers Drug Mart in town, able to, you know, deliver, you know, drugs quickly to the seniors' home down the street type of thing. So we are exploring all those type of initiatives. Really exciting to see if we can make it work. Drone delivery is not new. It's new to Innisfil, and we're really definitely trying to explore it.
Great. And when you're struggling with those things, Mike, I'm happy to introduce you to Catherine McCullough, who has an expertise in drone and aviation law. I don't know if Natalie, Tim, you have anything to add on that point. I will happily continue to segue into other related areas, but I'm pausing because I see Tim's unmuted.
Yeah, just briefly, you know, there's the whole, I won't call the legal side boring, Kat, but, you know, there's that whole legal side and financial side to it. And then there's, you know, there's a physical space side as well, which I think Natalie will probably have more comments on. But, you know, how do we, and this might be a theme of one of the questions moving forward, but, you know, how do we future-proof ourselves without overwhelming ourselves to, you know, to have these buildings that, you know, can have platforms, can have delivery areas, you know, can have roof space, et cetera, and the flight paths in between them, so that we're not missing out on those opportunities, you know, as those other challenges are met.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think that's part of that behavioral shift that we're seeing in people and in society, right? The fact is that we're seeing a lot more online shopping, and I don't think that that's necessarily something that we have to discourage. But, you know, delivery vehicles are increasing congestion pretty significantly in cities. So I think drones could be a great solution to that. And as far as like the building standpoint, right, we just need to be aware, right, of potential noise hazards to building residents, because, you know, noise is really bad for mental health. So you want to be able to protect against that, as well as any potential like wind pressure changes that are now going to be impacting, you know, especially glazed skyscrapers. You don't want any kind of wind pressures passing by them to knock glass or any other kind of building facade element off the building. But I think those are all things that you can resolve and work around through some of these types of drone regulations or policies.
Mm-hmm. I've had some great conversations with Catherine over air rights. We consider air rights in the development industry a little bit differently than when you're looking at sort of the drone usage of or delivery by drones. But yeah, it's a very interesting space. And also, I know we chatted a little bit about, does that then impact SDC ratings for windows and things like that? So maybe turning to that, and building on the earlier panel that spoke about drones and the usage of drones within the construction industry. what are you seeing in the future proofing or future planning for buildings for construction and that sort of thing? What are you considering? Natalie, what have you seen in your experience on the projects you've worked on?
Oh man, that's a big one. I mean, it can vary so much on the building use type, right? Hospitals, you always have to future proof to a certain extent. And a lot of time that's just by creating redundancy and just over structuring the building. In other cases, a lot of our transit stations will actually create or build in knockout panels within the station. So you can easily expand or add wings or add bays to the different facilities and stations. But I think even more than that, it's a conversation, I think, about cost to a certain extent. Some future proofing practices are just good best practices, but we have to sometimes reduce or kind of value engineer some of those things out just because of the potential increased upfront cost. And I think what's really important to note, especially with future proofing, sometimes it can be harder to predict what the economic value is of future proofing, but it can significantly reduce costs down the line. And so I think that's something in the building industry that we need to really be looking a little bit more at is accepting upfront costs a little bit more openly so that we can ensure the longevity and the durability of a building. And that's not always an easy conversation to have with maybe a developer or someone who's not looking to operate and maintain their building. So I'm kind of attacking your question in a lot of different ways, but yeah, I think it's really just about life cycle costing analyses and being better about understanding the costs of buildings over the term of their life.
That's a really good point, Natalie, because that's sort of what I was alluding to earlier. We're working with the developers, partnering with the developers, because the technology coming in is not necessarily cheap. So we need them to help embed it into those buildings that we're building. But even from a sustainability initiatives, it's cheaper not to do sustainability. So we create the business case, and that's where I put my finance hat on and say, okay, can we create a business case? Like you say, Natalie, it's more expensive now, but in the long run, it's going to be cost effective. And that's the positioning we need to have with the developers that we work with and partner with to create some of these initiatives that are going to be enduring long into the future.
And I think part of that too is planting the seeds, right? Is, little things that we can do now to make big differences later. And, a great example that comes to mind is Hudson Yards in New York City, right? Where a planner decades ago decided to, leave a little bit more space between those rails for a structure to support development above. And, now it's turned into probably one of the biggest developments in New York's history, and facilitated much easier in a way, by those little decisions that were made decades ago. So, that kind of stuff keeps me up at night because God knows how much I'm missing when I'm going through some of this stuff. But, at the same time, though, it's exciting as well. And, the buy-in from the developers is important. And, it's hard to talk about things like hyperloops and gondolas and all these other cool things that are probably going to show up in the next 50 years and, not be laughed out of the room because, there's that shorter term view, without that life cycle cost attached to it, that we really need to get our head around and somehow promote when we're incentivizing development and building out orbit.
I think
go ahead.
I was just thinking, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add one little thing, which is I think the scariest thing about future proofing is the uncertainty, right? Like, how are you supposed to know what you're future proofing for if you haven't built it yet or someone hasn't even invented it yet? And so that's where flexibility, adaptability, knockout panels, access panels, just preparing as much as you can for that uncertainty can be really challenging, but there are kind of ways to go about it.
I think just that flexibility and adaptability, I think I'm going to spin it back to sort of the municipal perspective. Like, we're lucky because we have an incredible council that supports these kind of things, and Tim's like really creative. We got some great ideas that we throw on the table, and first, is raise the eyebrow. But, what I think from a municipal perspective, we're truly blessed that we have this council that really supports these initiatives for us going forward. And they've embraced them all. I mean, I can't think of, too many. They said, you're ridiculous, you can't do that. So they embrace it, they encourage it. And I think that's what creates that organizational culture of innovation and creativity, especially in Innisfil, and that was my attraction to the town, because they were so forward thinking in the things they do, which has been really supported by a strong council that, you know, agrees with those and wants to be leading edge and think now for the future and for future generations. And that's what we're really seeing.
Thanks for all that. I'm grinning. I think you're probably catching on to why I'm grinning. Between Natalie sort of saying, you know, I'm kind of addressing all these different points and moving in various directions, and the three of us unmuting at the same time to weigh in. This is really an exciting time in Innisfil, and an exciting time for all of us in embracing change and trying to figure our way through this change. So I was actually struggling with going down, and I'll tell you the two directions, and then we can start on one of them. I was struggling to go down the path of, you know, how to make decisions and weigh considerations, taking into consideration climate change, health and wellness, and those very important, you know, decisions that are made around those considerations. ESG, we heard about a little bit from Clint earlier today. And then I was also thinking about the infrastructure and kind of from the ground up aspect of things like water, things like energy. And I think maybe let's start with the water, energy, infrastructure, and then tackle the second part of this, but I don't want to constrain the discussion in any way. So please, whoever would like to get started.
Just really quickly from my finance hat, I love the conversation earlier with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. Really exciting to see that money's out there and able to work with developers, you know, get that equity contribution, so a true PPP, you know, relationship and to build this infrastructure. And that's what, I mean, Tim, you can go more on the energy side and sustainability stuff. Some of the cool things we're trying to get into with the orbit for sure, using that type of partnership and that type of financing from a federal level.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And you know, the other great piece about orbit is because of a small footprint, you know, things are less expensive on the infrastructure side. So, you know, and you know, between that and some of the more creative financing that's out there these days, I think it does open the door for us, you know, doing things and including things like gray water reuse, you know, on a centralized basis. Certainly district energy is top of mind for us. You know, we haven't talked too much about sustainability yet, but you know, are there meaningful things that we can include now that, you know, that are quite easy to flip the switch on later to make a very large contribution from a carbon neutrality point of view? And you know, I think we're getting a lot more direction, you know, this week after Scotland and the direction the world is moving in that regard. But I don't think it's any secret that we're going that way. So in the case of district energy, you know, yes, you know, we haven't been in the district energy business before. Thankfully, it's getting more common now. And I think, Kat, your firm's involved in some of those systems. But, you know, what are those, you know, we don't want to lose that opportunity. So, you know, a 4-pipe system, you know, has to go in now, basically. You know, it's, you know, sorry, Mike, it's not going to make a lot of money in the short term. But, you know, it is going to pay dividends later when we can, you know, simply switch to a cleaner energy source or a clean energy source that's more carbon neutral and have a huge effect all at one time instead of trying to go back and retrofit buildings and convince people it's the right thing to do at that time.
Yeah, but part of that calculation isn't just necessarily dollars and cents. It's also the reduction of the greenhouse gases and, you know, reduction in the carbon footprint. And that's the hard messaging is to get out there. It's not just dollars and cents. There's more to it in that equation.
And to add to that, a lot that we're not currently paying for, right? There's a lot of environmental damage that's being caused by the way that we use our raw materials, and it's not being accounted for anywhere in the chain right now. And so I think if we were to start doing that, we would be making very different decisions about carbon, about energy, about all these different things. And, you know, the way I usually look at, you know, you mentioned health and wellness, but we're also talking about district energy. So I'm going to kind of bounce around a bit, but I think when it comes to district energy, something I've seen a lot about lately is that transitioning from fossil fuels over to electric renewable energy. And I think the biggest challenges that we're facing there is that it's going to take time to really go fully renewable. And we're really going to have to rely on distributed district energy, which means we're going to be generating energy not just from big central plants, but now we're going to be asking residents, we're going to be asking companies, we're going to be asking developers, hey, pitch in here, give us a little bit of that renewable energy. And so that grid is really going to spread out a whole lot. And that's infrastructure that hasn't really been built in yet at all. And it's really hard to kind of adapt it after the fact. And even beyond that as well is what does that transition look like? Because right now grid systems are very mixed. There is a lot of natural gas being used in our electric grids. And so as a building, when you're building a building from scratch, you have to consider it might be better to be gas right now, but we do need to be able to transition over into renewable energy or all electric in the future. And what does that look like? Do we pick out that electric stove right now? Do we get, there's fuel switching is a big conversation in the construction industry right now, right? Or do we just bite the bullet, make the whole building electric, know that it's going to increase our greenhouse gas emissions at the beginning, but that then in the long term, then that we'll get the savings back. So those are my 2 cents about district energy. And then regarding health and wellness, I think that there are 3 things that people kind of don't really fully take into account, and that's water quality, air quality, as well as I'm blanking on the third one, but like noise and other kinds of impacts. As far as water quality is concerned, I think people aren't really understanding how our drinking water is affected. In the United States, there are carcinogens that are found in 14 different wells all across the Corn Belt. And a lot of that is coming from runoffs, right? So from highways, roadways, as well as farmland. If you're using a lot of pesticides, fertilizers, all of that runs off and it eventually leaches into the groundwaters. And that's showing up in our tap water. It's, and that's affecting health. And beyond that as well, when it comes to air, I think the thing I hear the most often is we don't need to think about air filtration systems because we're in a suburban area or we're in a mountainous region and we have really pristine air quality. But what people forget is that indoor air quality can be 2 to 5 times worse than outdoor air quality at any given time. And a lot of those air pollutants are coming from your buildings. It's coming from your VOC, so volatile organic compounds. It's coming from your pets. It's coming from your laundry. If you dry clean provide like off gas is a lot of formaldehyde. And so those are the things that I think people sometimes take for granted, that water quality isn't a given, air quality isn't a given. And so you do have to work for it. And as we continue to urbanize it, those topics are going to become more and more important. And we're just seeing now with COVID, right, where you have COVID viruses that are being tacked on, right? They're carrying themselves on the particulate matter that gets distributed around buildings. And depending on the kind of mechanical system that you're using, it could be, traveling from the ground floor all the way to the 10th floor. So I'm kind of now blabbing a lot, but I think it's safe to say, I think health and wellness is going to be, I think, a big topic of discussion in smart cities moving forward.
I'm going to borrow from my partner, Michael Ludgett, who spoke on or moderated 2 panels earlier, and say we could probably go on for 2 hours on these topics. But in the last few minutes, and I can't believe how quickly it's run out. I knew it would run out quickly, but it's been really, really quick. There's related to the P3, public-private partnerships and engagement question for me. Maybe a different side of it, but is that community engagement and community buy-in piece that I think is important and oftentimes in Ontario, at least from my perspective and my role in this industry, a challenge at times. I wanted to put that out there for comment. Should you want to comment on that and really open up the last 3 minutes to say anything in closing that you'd wanted to mention during the session as we sort of come up to the hour.
Sure.
I think Mike's ready.
Yeah, community engagement is absolutely critical. And try and get those feedback loops and understanding, and what we don't call it, we reframed it, from a smart city to an insightful city, and trying to get insight on our residents to understand what they want, what they need, to give them the best services and the best they can. So that whole community engagement piece is absolutely critical, especially we can assure, because we really want them to embrace and trust technology, because it's such a powerful tool to really impact their lives, not be fearful of it. And I think that's where community engagement is so critical to get that message out, for sure.
Yeah, and just building on that, CAT, it can't be a legislative requirement, which is what it is most of the time in our industry. It has to be authentic, and certainly that's what we're embedding early and often, as we go through a secondary plan process for Orbit, is getting that authenticity. And the other really interesting piece, and we could talk an hour on this, is, not only the existing residents who may or may not live in orbit, but those future residents, right? How do we get the insights of the people we don't even know who are going to live there yet? And, that's a challenge we're throwing towards the consulting team, and very curious to see how that's going to turn out.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that, right, it's, I think sometimes there's this thought that it's public versus private, and I think that can be a really negative way of looking at it. I think the way of the future, especially with smart cities, where you're going to need a lot of hands on deck to really envision a holistic, society and culture, you need everyone on hands, and everyone brings different insights and perspectives. And so I think that needs to be encouraged. And I think the public-private partnership, I think there's so much potential there in just providing equitable services to everyone.
Consistent with our experience today, we've covered a lot of ground during this session. I think we somewhat touched on the information and communication technology piece, but specifically, if there's anything you'd like to add with respect to the Internet of Things, AI, and that's a piece of the conversation, or any closing remarks, or I'll open it up before we wrap up.
I think the AI piece is huge for me. My passion is AI, and getting a schooling in AI and how to incorporate it across the municipality is really, really exciting to do. But to use it manageably and do it and manage it properly and implement it properly, to, once again, protect the privacy rights of residents, because it can be a very invasive technology. And I think that comes back to the trust and embracing of technology, as long as you can prove you're doing it, carefully and prudently to preserve and respect your residents.
And I think, oh, sorry. And I think purposely too, Mike, not doing tech for tech's sake, but doing it purposely. And, there's this really interesting concept coming out of Finland, the 25-hour, 7-day-a-week city, whereby, the use of technology basically gives people, that most fundamental thing back in their lives they can't get, and that's time. So, if we can use AI and use that tech to, to make lives easier and to move around, that's going to be a key part of orbit as well.
Great, Natalie, I'll give you the last word on this. Please go ahead.
No pressure. Yeah, I think AI, we've just barely scratched the surface at it. It's still a technology that's evolving very quickly. And when we talk about energy models, we have a saying, say, garbage in, garbage out. And so I think that to use AI effectively, and I think there's immense potential in AI, so don't get me wrong when I say garbage in, garbage out. I just mean, I think that data collection and data quality is going to be so important in training our AI systems to make the right decisions. And I guess I'll leave it with a final thought there, which is, so Berkeley actually has a live Google Doc, I believe it is, where they track all the different AI systems and potential equity mistakes that they've made. And I think that Google Doc is super important, because it really touches on that, which is garbage in, garbage out. If you're providing wrong data and the machine is now learning bad habits, it's something that we as humans, we know to be aware and conscious of, like trying to correct our biases. But a machine, a computer, AI, how are we going to teach it to question itself? So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Natalie. That's wonderful. And I know you and IBI are doing a lot in this space with the Smart Cities Sandbox. I think a lot of themes came out of our conversation, and things, we didn't directly touch on. Fear seems to be a big theme in terms of, not being fearful of either missing out or change, really. And I think that's part of the discussion as well. I thank you all so very much for joining us today. Natalie, Mike, and Tim, I thank you for your time. And I will wrap things up. And in closing, wow, I think we've covered so much ground today with this panel and all of our panels. That was a loaded amount of information and content to digest. And we covered a lot of ground with insight from Barcelona, South Korea, with Songdo, to ESG, digital twinning, drones, and evolution of prop tech, construction in the construction industry, using technology to improve the development process and application process, autonomous vehicles, 5G, expanding high-speed internet, and closing off with a focus on a smart, sustainable community in Ontario and beyond from the ground up with the discussion we had regarding Innisfil and Orbit. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. Thank you to all of our wonderful speakers for your time. And thank you to the audience for spending the day with us.